20 years after my father threw me out for getting pregnant at 16, I stood beside my mother's casket while he smirked at me across the funeral home. "Looks like life finally punished you after all," he said. The room fell silent. My aunts looked away. My cousins pretended not to listen. And my father smiled the same smile I remembered from the night he locked me out of our house with a trash bag full of clothes and nowhere to go. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I smiled back. "Actually, Dad," I said quietly, "I'd like you to meet my husband." His expression didn't change. Not yet, because he still thought he knew exactly who I was. He still thought I was the scared 16-year-old girl he had thrown away. He had no idea what happened after he slammed that door. And he had absolutely no idea who was about to walk through the front entrance of that funeral home. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and this is how my father spent 20 years believing he had destroyed my future, only to discover he had been completely wrong. I was 16 years old when my life split into two separate pieces. There was the life before that night, and there was everything that came after. I still remember standing in our kitchen with my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the pregnancy test. Outside, rain hammered against the windows. Inside, my father sat at the dining room table reading the local newspaper while my mother washed dishes at the sink. The entire house smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner. Ordinary. Comfortable. Safe. At least it had been safe until I opened my mouth. "Dad," I whispered. He lowered the newspaper slightly. "What?" My throat felt dry. "I need to tell you something." My mother turned around immediately. She knew something was wrong. Mothers usually do. I looked down at the test in my hand. Then I forced the words out. "I'm pregnant." For a second, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The clock above the stove ticked loudly. Tick, tick, tick. My father stared at me as if I had started speaking another language. Then he slowly stood up. "What did you say?" "I'm pregnant." His face changed. I had seen him angry before. I had seen him frustrated. I had seen him disappointed. But I had never seen this. This looked like hatred. "Tell me you're joking." I couldn't. My mother covered her mouth. Tears appeared instantly in her eyes. My father slammed both hands against the table. The sound made me jump. "Who?" I told him. "A boy from school." My boyfriend. Or at least he had been my boyfriend until 2 days earlier when he stopped answering my calls. Dad stared at me for several seconds. Then he laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because he couldn't believe what he was hearing. 16 years old. I didn't answer. 16. His voice got louder. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" My mother stepped forward. "Richard, please." "No." He pointed directly at me. "You embarrassed this family." "Dad, you humiliated us." Tears rolled down my face. "I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean to," he shouted. "You didn't mean to get pregnant." My mother started crying openly now. I wanted her to hug me. I wanted someone to tell me everything would be okay. Instead, my father looked at me like I was a stranger standing in his kitchen. "Were you planning to tell people—" The question confused me. "What?" "The baby." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" His jaw tightened. "What were you planning to do about it?" The meaning hit me instantly. I felt sick. "No." His eyes narrowed. "No, I'm keeping my baby." The room exploded. My father knocked a chair backward. "You are not bringing that shame into my house." "It's my baby. It's a mistake. It's my child. It's ruining your life." The argument lasted nearly an hour, maybe longer. Time blurred together. At some point, my mother sat down and cried into a dish towel. At some point, I stopped crying because I was simply exhausted. At some point, my father made his decision. I knew the exact moment. His voice suddenly became calm. Cold. Dangerously calm. "You have 2 choices." My stomach tightened. "What choices?" "You get rid of it." I felt the floor disappear beneath me. Or, his eyes locked onto mine. "Or you leave." I couldn't breathe. My mother gasped. "Richard?" He ignored her. "You are not staying in this house if you insist on making this mistake." "Dad." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You'd really throw me out." He didn't hesitate. "Yes." The word landed like a punch. My mother grabbed his arm. "She's our daughter. Not if she chooses this." I remember looking at him and searching desperately for some sign that he didn't mean it. Some sign that this was anger talking. Some sign that he would calm down. There wasn't one. He meant every word. I spent that night packing. Not because I wanted to. Because he stood in the hallway and watched me do it. I packed jeans, sweaters, a few photographs, some books, the stuffed bear my mother gave me when I was 6. My mother followed me from room to room crying quietly. Every few minutes she begged him to stop. Every few minutes he refused. Around midnight he carried my bags to the front door. The rain was still falling outside. The porch light reflected off the wet driveway. Everything looked cold, gray, unreal. I stood in the doorway holding my coat. My mother hugged me so tightly I thought she might never let go. "I'm sorry," she whispered through tears. "I love you. I love you too." She tried to hand me some money. My father stopped her. "No?" She stared at him in disbelief. "Richard?" "No." His voice echoed through the hallway. I looked at him one last time. I kept waiting for him to change his mind. He didn't. Instead, he opened the front door wider. The message was clear. Leave. Now. So I stepped outside. Rain soaked my hair almost immediately. My hands trembled around the handle of my suitcase. Behind me, my mother cried. In front of me, the world felt enormous and terrifying. I took 3 steps down the walkway. Then I heard the door close. Not slam. Not bang. Just close. Slowly. Deliberately. Like he was sealing something forever. I turned around. The porch light disappeared. Then the living room light. Then the kitchen light. One by one, the house went dark. And standing there alone in the rain, 16 years old and pregnant, I realized something that would shape the rest of my life. My father wasn't waiting for me to come home. As far as he was concerned, I no longer had one. Then 20 years later, my phone rang, and the woman who had loved me despite everything was gone. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was standing in my office at Fort Liberty reviewing deployment readiness reports when my phone vibrated against my desk. The moment I saw my cousin Laura's name, a knot formed in my stomach. Laura never called during work hours. Never. I answered immediately. "Laura." For a few seconds, all I heard was breathing. Then she spoke. "Sarah, it's Aunt Denise. She's with me." Something was wrong. I could hear it instantly. My hand tightened around the phone. "What happened?" There was another pause. Then Aunt Denise's voice came through. Soft. Broken. "Honey?" My chest tightened. No. Nobody had told me anything yet. But somehow I already knew. "No." "I'm so sorry." The room seemed to tilt. "Your mother passed away this morning." I don't remember sitting down. One moment I was standing. The next I was staring at the wall across from my desk while the words echoed through my head. Passed away. Passed away. Passed away. My mother was gone. The woman who had spent 20 years loving me from a distance. The woman who never stopped being my mother even when everyone else pretended I didn't exist. Gone. I don't know how long I sat there after the call ended. Maybe 5 minutes. Maybe 30. Grief doesn't care about time. Eventually, I opened the top drawer of my desk. Inside was a small wooden box. The same wooden box I'd carried through military housing deployments, promotions, and moves across 3 continents. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Every single one written by my mother. I opened the box and touched the top envelope. The handwriting was familiar, comforting, painful. Dear Sarah. I couldn't read any further. Not yet. Because reading her words meant accepting that there would never be another letter. Never another phone call. Never another birthday card signed with her careful handwriting. Nothing. The finality of it hit harder than I expected. My mother had been the bridge connecting me to the family I lost. Now even that bridge was gone. And suddenly memories I'd spent years burying began rising to the surface. The first year after Dad threw me out was brutal. People like to talk about strength after the fact. They admire resilience once they know the ending. But resilience doesn't feel noble when you're living it. It feels terrifying. I spent the first 3 months sleeping on a friend's couch. Then in a church-sponsored apartment for struggling mothers. Then in a tiny studio apartment with peeling paint and a heater that barely worked. I worked wherever I could. Restaurants, grocery stores, cleaning offices at night, anything that paid enough to keep food on the table. I was 17 when Ethan was born. The moment they placed him in my arms, everything changed. He had tiny fingers, tiny ears, tiny eyelashes, and absolutely none of the shame my father had attached to his existence. He was just a baby. My baby. Perfect. Beautiful. Innocent. I remember looking at him and making a promise. I won't fail you. At the time, I had no idea how I would keep that promise. But I meant it. Every word. The years that followed became a blur of exhaustion. I'd work all day, study at night, take community college classes whenever I could afford them, sleep whenever Ethan slept. There were nights I cried in the bathroom because I couldn't pay a bill. There were mornings I smiled anyway because Ethan deserved a mother who kept moving forward. Through all of it, one person never disappeared. My mother. At first, her support came secretly. Small envelopes, birthday cards, letters. Occasionally $20 folded inside a greeting card. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic. Just enough to remind me I wasn't completely alone. Every letter ended the same way. I love you. Sometimes that single sentence carried me through entire weeks. Years passed. Ethan grew. I grew. And slowly the scared girl my father threw away began changing into someone else. Someone stronger. Someone harder. Someone who understood that survival wasn't enough anymore. I wanted more than survival. I wanted purpose. The military entered my life almost by accident. I met a female Army officer during a college career fair. She wasn't loud. She wasn't intimidating. But she carried herself with a confidence I'd never seen before. I asked questions. She answered them. Then she looked directly at me and said something that changed my future. Stop focusing on where you've been. I blinked. What? Focus on where you're going. Simple. Direct. Life-changing. 6 months later, I enlisted. Years after that, I earned my commission. And for the first time in my life, I found something that made sense. The Army didn't care about my mistakes. It cared about performance. Discipline. Character. Results. The standards were clear. Meet them or don't. There were no rumors. No judgment. No small-town whispers about teenage pregnancy. Only responsibility. And responsibility was something I understood very well. I threw myself into the work. Training, leadership courses, deployments, field exercises, everything. I learned quickly, promoted quickly, advanced quickly. Sometimes because I was talented. More often because failure simply wasn't an option. Every achievement felt like another brick in a foundation I was building for Ethan. And maybe if I was being completely honest for myself too, because every time someone told me I couldn't do something, I remembered my father standing in that doorway. Every time someone doubted me, I remembered him calling my child a mistake. Every promotion felt like proof. Not for him, for me. Years became decades. Ethan graduated high school, then college, then surprised absolutely nobody by choosing military service himself. The day he put on his uniform, I cried harder than I had at his graduation, because I saw what he'd become. Strong, kind, disciplined, a good man. The exact opposite of everything my father predicted. You did this, Mom, Ethan told me afterward. No, I said. We did. Through all those years, my mother remained my secret lifeline. Sometimes we'd talk on the phone, sometimes only through letters. She always had to be careful. Dad hated when my name came up. According to relatives, he never changed, never softened, never apologized. He simply erased me. At family gatherings, he acted like I didn't exist. If someone mentioned me, he'd change the subject. If someone mentioned Ethan, he'd leave the room. The cruelty of it used to hurt. Eventually, it just felt sad. Because while he was busy pretending I wasn't part of the family, my mother never stopped keeping me close. I learned that after one particular visit about 10 years earlier. Mom had secretly shown me something. A photo album. Every page was filled with pictures. Me, Ethan, military ceremonies, graduations, promotions, birthdays. Every photo I'd ever sent. Every single one. She kept them hidden in her bedroom closet. When I asked why, she smiled sadly. Because you're my daughter. That was all. No explanation needed. Because mothers understand things fathers sometimes don't. They understand that love isn't something you withdraw when you're disappointed. Love stays, even when everything else falls apart. 3 days after learning she had died, I received a second call. This one came from Laura. The funeral is Friday. I closed my eyes. Okay. There was a hesitation. Then she added quietly, Your father asked if you're coming. I almost laughed. 20 years. 20 years of silence. And now he wanted an answer. Did he really ask? Yes. I stared out my office window. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I answered. Tell him I'll be there. After we hung up, I sat alone, looking at the letters, thinking about the house, the town, the people I hadn't seen in 2 decades, thinking about the father who had never forgiven me, and wondering whether I was ready to see him again. 3 days later, I boarded a flight home, not knowing that my mother's final gift was waiting for me, or that my father's biggest mistake was about to catch up with him. The funeral home looked smaller than I remembered. As the rental car rolled into the parking lot, I sat behind the wheel for a few moments without moving. 20 years. 20 years since I'd walked the streets of that town. 20 years since I'd seen the house where I grew up. 20 years since my father had erased me from his life. Yet somehow everything looked familiar. The same church steeple. The same diner across the street. The same row of maple trees lining the sidewalk. Time had passed. But not enough. I shut off the engine and stared at my reflection in the windshield. At 16, I had left this town pregnant, terrified, and completely alone. Now I was 36 years old. A senior army officer. A mother. A wife. A woman who had built a life from the ashes of the one she'd lost. Yet, as I looked at the funeral home's front doors, I felt 16 again. Not because I was afraid of my father. Because I was about to bury my mother. Nothing prepares you for that. Nothing. Inside, the air smelled faintly of flowers and furniture polish. Soft music played somewhere in the background. People spoke in hushed voices. The moment I stepped inside, several heads turned. For a second, nobody seemed sure who I was. Then recognition spread across a few faces. Aunt Denise approached first. The moment she reached me, she wrapped both arms around me. Oh, sweetheart. That was all she managed before tears overwhelmed her. I hugged her tightly. Neither of us spoke. There weren't any words big enough. One by one, relatives approached. Some remembered me clearly. Others seemed surprised. A few looked uncomfortable. I understood why. Family scandals have long memories in small towns. To many of them, I was still the pregnant teenager who had disappeared 20 years earlier. They hadn't seen the decades in between. The struggle. The sacrifice. The victories. The life. Then I saw him. My father stood near the front of the room beside the casket. Older. Thinner. His hair almost completely gray. Age had carved deep lines into his face, but the posture was the same. The expression was the same. Even from across the room, I could recognize that stubborn pride. For a moment, I simply looked at him. And for a moment, he looked at me. No smile. No greeting. No embrace. Nothing. Just a long, silent stare. Then he looked away, as if I were another guest attending the service. Not his daughter. I wish I could say that hurt. The truth is, it didn't surprise me. Not anymore. I walked toward my mother's casket. Every step felt heavier than the last. Then I saw her. And suddenly the room disappeared. The people disappeared. The years disappeared. All I could see was my mother. I reached out and touched the edge of the casket. My hand trembled. I had prepared myself for this moment. Or at least I thought I had. I was wrong. No amount of preparation can convince your heart that someone is gone. My mother looked peaceful, almost asleep. For several seconds I couldn't speak. Then the words came quietly, barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Mom." My throat tightened. "I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner." A tear slid down my cheek. "I hope you knew how much I loved you." More tears followed. "I hope you knew that every letter mattered." The memories came all at once. Birthday cards, phone calls, hidden photographs, encouraging words during deployments, care packages sent overseas. Every act of love she had risked my father's anger to give me. Every sacrifice she had quietly made. I closed my eyes. For a moment I simply stood there, grieving, remembering, thanking her. When I finally stepped away, Aunt Denise approached again. "There's something you should see." I frowned. "What is it?" She glanced toward my father, then lowered her voice. "Come with me." She led me down a hallway toward a small office behind the chapel. Inside sat several boxes, photo albums, documents, folders. At first I didn't understand. Then Aunt Denise smiled sadly. "Your mother organized all of this before she died." I stared at the boxes. "What is it?" "Your life." My chest tightened. Slowly she opened the first box. Inside were photographs, thousands of them. Pictures I'd sent over 20 years. Promotions, award ceremonies, deployments, family vacations. Pictures of Ethan growing up, pictures of my wedding, pictures of birthdays, pictures of holidays, pictures of ordinary moments. Every memory I'd shared with my mother, she had saved them all. Every single one. My vision blurred. "Oh, Mom." Aunt Denise wiped her eyes. "She was so proud of you." I couldn't speak. I simply stared. The second box contained letters. Every letter I'd ever mailed. Carefully organized. Carefully preserved. The third contained newspaper clippings. Military articles. Promotion announcements. Community features. Anything mentioning my name. My mother had collected everything. For 20 years. The realization nearly broke me. While my father had spent decades pretending I didn't exist, my mother had spent those same decades making sure I never disappeared. Then Aunt Denise handed me a sealed envelope. My name was written across the front. Sarah. The handwriting was unmistakable. My mother's. My heart began pounding. When did she write this? A few weeks ago. I stared at the envelope. Suddenly I wasn't sure I wanted to open it. Because once I did, there would never be another letter. This would be the last one. The final conversation. The final words. Eventually I sat down and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. The paper shook slightly in my hands as I began reading. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And if I'm gone, then I imagine your father still hasn't apologized. A painful laugh escaped me. Even now, she knew him perfectly. I continued reading. I spent years hoping he would change, years praying he would realize what he lost. But pride is a difficult thing to surrender, especially for a man who believes being right matters more than being loving. Tears filled my eyes. Your father thinks he punished you 20 years ago. The truth is that he punished himself. Because every birthday he missed was his loss. Every achievement he ignored was his loss. Every moment with Ethan was his loss. And every year without his daughter was his loss. I had to stop reading for a moment. The words hit too hard. Too accurately. Too honestly. After several deep breaths, I continued. You became the woman I always knew you could be. Not because life was kind to you, but because you refused to let hardship define you. I am proud of you. I have always been proud of you. Never forget that. My tears landed on the page. I wiped them away carefully. Then I reached the final paragraph. And everything changed. There is one more thing you should know. Your father doesn't know it yet, but the truth always arrives eventually. When it does, let kindness be stronger than anger. Because revenge ends pain for a moment. Grace ends it forever. Love, Mom. I sat motionless, reading those final lines again, and again, and again. Then I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Aunt Denise watched quietly. What did she say? I smiled through tears. She was still trying to keep the peace. Aunt Denise laughed softly. That sounds like Helen. A few minutes later, we returned to the main chapel. Guests were beginning to gather for the reception after the service. Conversations filled the room. Coffee cups clinked. People shared stories about my mother. For the first time since arriving, I felt a small measure of peace. Then I noticed movement across the room. My father was walking toward me. Slowly. Deliberately. His hands folded behind his back. A strange smile appeared on his face. Not warm. Not friendly. Something colder. Something familiar. The same expression he wore 20 years earlier when he told me to leave. And the moment I saw it, I knew. This wasn't going to be a reconciliation. Not even close. The reception began about 30 minutes after the funeral service ended. People gathered in small groups around the fellowship hall. Coffee was poured. Sandwich trays were brought out. Old friends shared stories about my mother. For a little while, the atmosphere softened. Not cheerful, but gentler. The kind of quiet warmth that sometimes follows a funeral when people begin remembering a life instead of mourning a death. I stood near one of the windows holding a cup of coffee I hadn't touched. Outside, the afternoon sky was turning gray. A storm was moving in. The sight reminded me of another storm. Another rainy night. Another goodbye. I pushed the memory away. I didn't come here to relive the past. I came here to say goodbye to my mother. Unfortunately, someone else had different plans. I noticed my father approaching long before he reached me. People stepped aside as he walked. Some glanced toward us nervously. Others pretended not to notice. Small towns have a way of sensing conflict before it happens. And after 20 years, everyone knew there was unfinished business between Richard Mitchell and his daughter. He stopped a few feet away. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The room seemed quieter somehow. Not silent. Just attentive. Waiting. Watching. My father looked older than he had earlier. Or maybe it was simply the lighting. The grief. The exhaustion. Whatever the reason, he suddenly looked like a man carrying a heavy burden. For one brief moment, I wondered whether he had finally come to apologize. Maybe losing Mom had changed something. Maybe grief had broken through the wall he'd built around himself. Maybe? Then he smiled, and every hopeful thought vanished. I recognized that smile instantly. The same smug smile he'd worn 20 years ago. The same smile he'd worn whenever he thought he was right. Whenever he thought he had won. Sarah. His voice was calm. Almost pleasant. Hello, Dad? Another pause. Then he looked me up and down. Not with affection. With judgment. As though evaluating the results of a prediction he'd made long ago. Finally, he nodded. Slowly. Well, I already knew I wasn't going to like whatever came next. Well, what? His smile widened slightly. Looks like life finally punished you after all. The words landed harder than I expected. Not because they hurt, Because they were so absurd. 20 years. 20 years had passed. My mother had just been buried. And this was what he wanted to say. I stared at him, certain I must have misunderstood. What? He shrugged, as though discussing the weather. You heard me. Several nearby conversations stopped. People weren't even trying to hide it anymore. My aunt froze halfway through pouring coffee. 2 cousins exchanged nervous looks. Nobody interrupted. Nobody moved. Everyone listened. My father folded his arms. You made your choices. There it was. The same argument. The same accusation. The same refusal to acknowledge anything beyond his own version of events. I see, I said quietly. He nodded. You got pregnant at 16. I didn't answer. You threw your future away. Still I said nothing. And now, his eyes drifted around the room, searching, looking for something, or someone. Then understanding appeared on his face, a look of satisfaction. You're here alone. I almost laughed. So that was it. That was what he'd noticed. No husband standing beside me. No dramatic entrance. No obvious signs of success. Just a woman attending her mother's funeral alone. And from that single observation, he had built an entire story. A story where he had been right all along. Life catches up with everyone eventually, he continued. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably. Even they seemed embarrassed. But my father kept talking. I suppose this is what happens. I raised an eyebrow. What happens when people refuse to listen? The irony was breathtaking. 20 years of silence, 20 years of stubborn pride. And somehow he still believed I was the one who refused to listen. I took a slow breath, remembering my mother's letter, remembering her final advice. Let kindness be stronger than anger. Not easy, but important, especially now. My father leaned slightly closer. His voice lowered, though not enough to keep others from hearing. You lost your family. I remained calm. You don't know anything about my family? His smile returned. Don't I? He glanced around again. Where's your husband? There it was. The real question. The thing that had been bothering him. The thing he thought proved his point. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Because he genuinely believed he understood what he was seeing. He genuinely believed my presence here alone meant I was alone in life. He had no idea how wrong he was. I have a husband. The words came out calmly. Matter of fact. Simple. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. Only for a second. Then it disappeared. I see. The tone made it obvious he didn't believe me. Or maybe he thought I was lying to save face. Either way, he wasn't convinced. And where is he? I checked my watch, then smiled. He'll be here soon. A few people exchanged curious looks. My father snorted softly. Of course. I almost laughed. There was something strangely tragic about this moment. He wanted me to have failed. Not consciously, perhaps, but deeply. Emotionally. He needed me to have failed. Because if I hadn't, then he would have to confront the possibility that he had been wrong. And that was something Richard Mitchell had spent 20 years avoiding. The room grew quieter. People sensed something was building. My father took another sip of coffee, then shook his head. You know what amazes me? I didn't answer. He continued anyway. Your mother never stopped defending you. Pain flickered through me. The mention of Mom always would. She loved me. She enabled you. The anger hit me so fast I nearly lost control. Nearly, but not quite. Because I remembered the promise I'd silently made beside my mother's casket. I wouldn't dishonor her memory by becoming bitter. Not today. Not here. So instead I smiled. A genuine smile. A calm smile. The kind that completely confused him. My father frowned. What? I shook my head. Nothing. No, what? I looked directly into his eyes. And for the first time all afternoon I felt completely at peace. Because suddenly I understood something. This conversation wasn't about me. It never had been. It was about him. His regrets. His pride. His inability to admit he had made the worst mistake of his life. And he still didn't know it. Not yet. I glanced toward the entrance. The front doors remained closed. But I knew they wouldn't stay closed much longer. Because somewhere on the highway, delayed by weather and traffic, a man was rushing to get here. A man who had spent years earning the respect of thousands. A man who loved my mother almost as much as I did. A man my father would recognize immediately. And when that happened, everything would change. My father followed my gaze toward the doors, then looked back at me. His expression hardened. You still think you've won something? I smiled softly. No, Dad. The confusion returned. No. I shook my head. Then I delivered the sentence that would change the rest of the afternoon. Actually, I paused, not for dramatic effect, because I suddenly wished Mom were here to see this. Then I looked at him again. I'd like to introduce you to my husband. My father laughed, a short dismissive laugh, the kind people use when they're absolutely certain they're right. Several relatives turned toward the entrance, almost instinctively, as if something in the air had shifted. And then it happened. The front doors opened. Every conversation in the room stopped. Every head turned. And a group of army officers stepped inside. My father's smile slowly disappeared, because leading them was a man wearing 3 silver stars on his shoulders. And the moment he entered the room, the entire funeral home went silent. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The entire room seemed frozen in place. The only sound came from the soft hum of the air conditioner somewhere above us. Every eye followed the group of officers as they entered the fellowship hall. Even people who knew nothing about the military understood that someone important had just arrived. There is a certain presence that comes with leadership, a confidence that doesn't need to announce itself. The man walking through those doors carried that presence effortlessly. Tall, calm, completely composed. 3 silver stars rested on his shoulders. Several officers followed behind him, not because they had to, because they respected him. My father stared openly. His coffee cup remained halfway between the table and his mouth. His expression shifted from annoyance to confusion to disbelief. I watched it happen in real time, and for the first time in 20 years I realized something. My father wasn't prepared, not even a little. The general scanned the room. Then his eyes found mine. Immediately his face softened. The corners of his mouth lifted into a warm smile. The smile of a husband who had spent the entire drive worried he might arrive too late. He walked directly toward me. The officers behind him slowed, giving him space, giving us a moment. When he reached me, he gently took my hand. "I'm sorry, sweetheart." His voice was quiet. "I got here as fast as I could." I squeezed his hand. "I know." His eyes moved briefly toward my mother's photograph. Sadness crossed his face. She deserved better than traffic. A laugh escaped me despite everything. That had always been David, able to find humanity even in grief. Then he wrapped his arms around me. Not dramatically, not for show. Just the steady embrace of someone who had spent years standing beside me through every challenge life had thrown our way. For a few seconds, I simply allowed myself to lean into him, allowed myself to breathe, allowed myself to stop being strong. When the hug ended, I turned toward my father. The room remained silent, waiting, watching. My father looked as though someone had suddenly changed the rules of reality. His gaze moved from David's face to the stars on his uniform, then back again, slowly, repeatedly. Trying to process what he was seeing, I smiled. Not triumphantly, not cruelly. Just honestly, Dad. His eyes locked onto mine. I'd never seen him look uncertain before. Never. Not once in my entire life, until that moment. "This is my husband." I paused, then finished the sentence. "General David Walker." The color drained from his face. Not all at once. Gradually, like someone pulling a curtain closed. Around us, whispers began spreading through the room. People recognized the name. Many had seen him on television. Others had read articles. Several veterans in attendance immediately straightened. One older man quietly muttered, "Holy hell." My father swallowed. Hard. "You." He looked at David, then back at me, then back at David. "You married?" His voice failed. David extended a hand. Professional. Respectful. "Richard." My father stared at it for a moment before finally shaking it. The entire interaction lasted perhaps 3 seconds, yet it felt much longer. Because for the first time, my father was standing face to face with evidence that his assumptions had been wrong, spectacularly wrong. But the biggest shock hadn't happened yet. Not even close. A young captain approached from behind the group. I recognized him immediately. One of the officers who had served under me years earlier. He stopped a respectful distance away, then addressed me. "Colonel Mitchell." The room went silent again, if that was even possible. "We're very sorry for your loss, ma'am." Another officer stepped forward, then another, and another, each greeting me exactly the same way. "Colonel Mitchell." "Colonel Mitchell." "Colonel Mitchell." The title echoed through the room, over and over. My father's eyes widened. I watched understanding slowly appear, then disbelief, then shock. Because until that moment he hadn't known. He had spent 20 years imagining a failure, 20 years imagining a cautionary tale, 20 years imagining a daughter whose life had collapsed. Instead, he had just learned that the teenage girl he threw away had become a United States Army colonel. And somehow that revelation hit him harder than meeting a 3-star general. Because this wasn't about David. This was about me. Everything he said would never happen had happened. Everything he claimed I would lose, I had built. Everything he thought he destroyed had survived. My father lowered himself slowly into a chair, as though his legs no longer trusted him. For several minutes, nobody said much. The energy in the room had completely changed. Not because people were impressed by rank, because people were witnessing the collapse of a story they'd believed for 20 years. Finally, my father looked up at me. The confidence was gone. The smugness was gone. Even the anger seemed gone. For the first time in my life, he simply looked tired. Very tired. His voice came out rough. "You never told anyone." I almost laughed. "Told who?" He didn't answer. Because there wasn't an answer. He had never called. Never written. Never asked. How could I tell someone who had spent 2 decades pretending I didn't exist? A long silence followed. Then I reached into my purse. Carefully, I removed my mother's final letter. The one I'd read earlier. The one she had written knowing she would soon be gone. I looked at it for a moment, then handed it to him. My father frowned. "What is this?" "The last letter Mom wrote." His hands trembled slightly as he accepted it. Slowly, he unfolded the paper. The room remained quiet. No one interrupted. No one rushed him. We all watched. His eyes moved across the page, line by line, word by word. Then he stopped. I knew exactly where. The sentence had stopped me too. "Your father thinks he punished you 20 years ago. The truth is that he punished himself." His jaw tightened. He continued reading. "Every birthday he missed was his loss. Every achievement he ignored was his loss. Every moment with Ethan was his loss. And every year without his daughter was his loss." A tear rolled down his cheek. Then another. I had never seen my father cry. Not when his father died. Not when he lost his job years earlier. Not once. Until now. The sight shocked me more than anything else that day. Because suddenly he didn't look like the man who threw me out. He looked like an old man realizing how much time he had wasted. When he finished reading, he lowered the letter slowly. For several seconds, he simply stared at the floor. Then he whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. "I thought I was teaching you a lesson." My chest tightened. 20 years. 20 years for that admission. 20 years too late. But still, it mattered. I sat down across from him. Not as a colonel. Not as a successful woman. Not as someone who had won. Simply as his daughter. The daughter he lost. The daughter who survived. The daughter sitting in front of him despite everything. "You did teach me something." He looked up. "What?" I thought about the answer, then smiled softly. "You taught me that family isn't defined by who shares your name." My eyes moved toward David, toward Ethan, toward the people who had stood beside me through the hardest years of my life. It's defined by who stays. More tears appeared in his eyes. I wasn't angry anymore. Strangely, I hadn't been angry for a long time. Grief had replaced anger years ago. Acceptance had replaced bitterness. And standing there beside my mother's memory, I finally understood what she had wanted all along. Not revenge. Peace. Eventually, people began leaving. The reception ended. Cars pulled out of the parking lot one by one. The storm outside finally arrived. Rain tapped softly against the windows. As David and I prepared to leave, my father stopped me. "Sarah." I turned. He stood holding my mother's letter, looking smaller somehow. Older. Human. I was wrong. 3 words. Simple. Late. Painfully late. But genuine. I nodded. Then I kissed his cheek. Not because everything was fixed. It wasn't. Not because 20 years disappeared. They didn't. But because carrying anger any further would only create another 20 years of silence. And I was done with silence. As David and I walked toward the doors, I looked back one final time. My father stood alone beside my mother's photograph, holding her letter, thinking about everything he had lost. And perhaps for the first time understanding why. 20 years earlier, he believed my pregnancy was the biggest mistake of my life. It wasn't. The biggest mistake was the day he chose his pride over his daughter. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced a family conflict that took years to heal? Leave a comment below and share where you're watching from. Stories like these remind us how precious time truly is, and how important it is to hold on to the people we love before it's too late. Subscribe and join us for more powerful stories every day. Until next time, take care of yourself and the people who matter most.